Hey everybody, welcome back to the BJJ Fanatics podcast. We are here with Kyle Cerminara, All-American wrestler, amazing MMA and jiu-jitsu coach, and one of the instructors on the Fanatic Wrestling site. Kyle, how you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Man, this is another first for me. I feel like I'm breaking ground every week. You're our first guest to call in from the middle of a hurricane, so we really appreciate it.
Yeah, dealing with that right now, so I don't have power on my house, but hopefully this Zoom holds up. But yeah, it's not a terrible hurricane, but it's still pretty annoying.
You've lived through worse. You're New York born and bred, right?
Yeah, I'm from the Buffalo area, but now I'm in Long Island. But I've lived a bunch of different places actually, but I'm pretty much probably permanently in Long Island.
Right on, right on. I want to ask you real quick about Buffalo because you did something really interesting to me in your wrestling career. At the University of Buffalo, you were a Division I All-American, but you were, I believe, the first Division I All-American for that school, which is always so interesting to me, and I want to ask you about that. When you show up there, obviously your goal is to be an All-American, be a national champion. You know, the ceiling's really high, but how does it feel knowing you're going to have to be like the first guy to do that? What's going through your head when you show up and you're building towards that?
Back then, I mean, this was 20 years ago, like when I was being recruited. I was in high school. I graduated in 2001. So back then there wasn't social media. There wasn't Flow Wrestling. There wasn't, like, wrestling wasn't as exposed as it is now, where like now you could really follow these wrestlers. You could really follow the NCAA tournament. There's the Big Ten Network, Flow Wrestling's at every event. There's track wrestling. There's so many different things. So it's, you're much more familiar with it. When I was in high school, I didn't really follow wrestling at all. I didn't really know anything about it. I was like, well, I was good in high school. I'll be good in college. I didn't know that, you had to go to like a storied program with good training partners and good coaches. I didn't know any of that. So I guess I was like really naive. So I just went there. I was like, well, I'll be good because I was good in high school and I trained hard and I did okay, but you never want to be like the first, I don't think. I think you want to be a product of a good program where like the expectations are, if you're at Oklahoma State and you're a one-time All-American, you're not even one of like an okay wrestler, the expectations are so much higher, and that's why, the results are so much better. So I just didn't know back then. So it wasn't like, oh, I got to be the first. I just assumed that it was going to be easy, to be honest.
So you say looking back, maybe you wouldn't want to be that, but now that you are that, is there some pride in knowing that you were the first one to be able to accomplish that?
I think it's kind of unique that I was able to do it there because no one's done it before and no one's done it since. But it's also like even 20 years later, it's still a little disappointing because what could I have done if I was at like a real program? Like there, it's really, at least when I was there, it's basically like an intramural program, but we just faced all the best teams. But like the training and stuff was so much different than the programs I've been around since then. So I don't really have like a whole lot of sense of accomplishment because my goal was to be a national champion and I wasn't.
I hear you. From there, if I have the timeline correct me if I'm wrong, you go from there to the OTC, right? Which
Yes.
It felt like a huge adjustment. Can you kind of tell me about going from like this intramural program, semi like you describe it, and then going to what I would imagine is the best training environment in the country?
Yeah, it was completely, like black and white. There's no comparison. I went out to the U.S. Open I think senior year of college, and I took 5th. And after that, I spoke with Terry Brands, who was the resident training coach at the Olympic Training Center, and he basically invited me to go train out there to live and train full time for the 2008 Olympics. And I did because I just kind of wanted to see how much better I can do with the top-notch coaching and top-notch workout partners and a real program and structure. And so when I went out there, it was there the goal isn't to be a national champion, it's to be a world or Olympic champion, and that's the only thing you're training for. So if you win the U.S. Open, but then you don't get an Olympic medal or a world medal, that's considered a disappointment. So the expectations are just so much higher. So you're just driven to do so much better when you're in an environment like that.
So what does living at the Olympic Training Center, what is that training like? Are you wrestling like 2-3 times a day? Are you lifting a lot? Like what does the workout schedule kind of generally look like in a week?
Well, now I think it's pretty different. Now I think athletes are at regional training centers, like all over. Like I know there's some in Iowa, there's some at Ohio State, Penn State, there's the New Jersey Regional Training Center. Athletes are all over. But back then it was pretty concentrated with all the best guys would go to the Olympic Training Center, and it was just about maybe 30 resident athletes, and you worked out twice a day. Generally on the mats probably 10 times a week, not necessarily twice every day, but 10 times a week on the mats, and then probably lifting and conditioning another like 3 or 4 times a week. Probably 12 workouts a week, I'd say 13 workouts a week. And just the competition was just with like some of the best guys. Like Henry Cejudo was there, Steve Mako, Mo Lawal. There was a lot of the very best guys, Bill Zadek, world champions, Olympic champions in the room every day. So, that's kind of where I learned to, set the bar a little higher. And, you want to be a product of the program you're in, everyone on the same page. I think that's how you really raise everyone's level together, everyone working towards the same goal.
For sure. It sounds like you worked a lot with Coach Terry Brands when you were there. Can you tell me a little bit about working with Coach Brands?
Yeah, he was the resident team coach, and he was just like, such an icon in the sport, and such an obsessed mind. He just wanted everyone to get better. He just ran such almost like a militant style program. Everyone like on the same page. We were, right out of college, but it was still so structured. It was, the time, you had to be on time. You had to, do all the right things. He was on top of what you were eating, making sure, you were doing the right things outside of the room. It was just, then in your corner, it's like when he was actually at the matches, I always felt a little bit more motivation because I'm like, I don't want to lose in front of Terry Brands. Like I felt like I'd be embarrassed to lose in front of him. So it kind of probably helped my wrestling, or maybe even added pressure. I don't know, but it was just such an icon of the sport. It was like a good person to learn from.
Did you find that he brought, so it sounds like he really did bring that intensity that he's famous for on the mat. Just like,
yeah, he's exactly what you think he would be.
That's hilarious. And then, so you mentioned some of the guys that were around the program at that time. Can you tell me a little bit about Henry Cejudo? I know we're a big fan of him at Fanatic Wrestling. You got any Henry Cejudo stories or anything?
Well, Henry was so young at the time. He was he moved to the training center right out of high school. So he was basically like 17, 18 years old. And I think when I got there, maybe he was 18 or 19. But he was like just, a young phenom. He was already, making waves on the world scene and making a world team, I think, right after his senior year. But, he was just like a super driven, motivated athlete. He was, and you knew that great things were going to happen for him. It was just in the stars. He was just a unique person. He did everything right and super gifted athlete. And it's been nice to see him go from like a kid to the best combat athlete of all time.
He really is, right? He's got the accomplishments to back that up. Since then, you spent time as a Division I coach in wrestling after the OTC. Did you like that very much? Did that, how did you feel about coaching at that level?
I liked it a lot. But I kind of wish that, looking back, I wish I would have stayed a little more as like a full-time athlete, either trying to make the 2012 team or got into MMA a little sooner. But I learned a lot about wrestling, about how to coach at a high level. I went to, from the Olympic Training Center, I took the assistant wrestling coach position at Edinburgh University, which is a pretty storied program as well. And I worked under Tim Flynn, who was a longtime coach there. Now he recently left. He's at West Virginia now. But I always thought that he was one of the best coaches in the country. I still do. And I learned so much from him because if you know anything about Edinburgh University, it's like basically like the smallest college you could imagine. It's a tiny little state school in Northeast Pennsylvania. And he, for 20 years, year in and year out, he produced NCAA champions and All-Americans basically like on a shoestring budget. You know, the entire program's budget is probably what, like, you know, a Penn State would spend on like office supplies. And that's Edinburgh's entire budget. And they were competitive. The 1 year I was there, we took, I think, 5th, and another year 3rd. So they were pretty elite program in a little teeny tiny state school in Northeast Pennsylvania. But he knew how to train people. He knew how to get people to get on the stand, and more so than almost any other coach, because he definitely does not get the best guys, and he could just make anyone good if they believe in the program. And I learned so much from him as a coach. And I actually still wrestled while I was there competitively, but it's not quite the same when you're trying to coach and you're not around all the best guys. But it was a good experience. He coached me quite a bit too. The 1 year I was there, I took 2nd at the U.S. Open, which was actually the highest I ever placed with him in my corner. So it was a good experience coaching there. And then after Edinburgh, I coached at the University of Pennsylvania.
Actually, Kyle, if I could ask you a question real quick. I want to ask you a question about Edinburgh and about Coach Flynn, because he is somebody who I have a ton of respect for. You know, like you said, 20 years at Edinburgh, just overperforming with all these guys. Is it because of, and you described him as a great coach and he's getting guys to buy into the program. Is he coaching them up on a technical level? Is he coaching them up to believe in themselves more? Is it a mentality thing? Like, where is he getting these guys to make these breakthroughs that maybe they didn't have before they got to college?
I think I wouldn't say that it's something on a technical level with him. He's not teaching any like crazy techniques that you've never seen before or anything super innovative. It's pretty basic technique that I think everyone can do, but he drills it into the kids that they believe in it and they do it in the matches. But I think that the thing that I learned about his program is that he's really good at getting people like physically ready. Like it's all their best guys like look like, you know, the best guys. They're all super jacked and strong, and they had great cardio and super explosive. And so I always say that Tim Flynn was the best strength and conditioning coach that I've ever been around, even though he was a wrestling coach, but he wore a lot of hats there because they didn't have a strength coach. So, but all their guys were the strongest, best conditioned guys. And, you know, you'd see that by the time the NCAA tournament came around that, you know, year in and year out, they'd have guys win. And I think that he just was able to get them to peak at the right time and get them physically ready for the grind of an entire tournament and NCAA tournament.
Man, amazing. And then after that was the University of Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And then what was your experience there? Tell me about that.
That was it was a good experience too. Like I enjoyed living in Philadelphia, and I enjoyed being around the guys at Penn. They were like obviously totally different than Edinburgh kids. You know, a lot of them were from like affluent families. They were super highly academically driven, but we would put out NCAA All-Americans too there. We had some good guys, and it's almost more impressive when kids can do that while carrying University of Pennsylvania academic schedule, which is pretty incredible when you see guys do that, or when even guys win at like the Ivy League schools like Matt Valenti or you know, what Kyle Dake did at Cornell. It's always astonishing to me that kids can do that. But it was kind of cool to be around a different type of person, like at the University of Pennsylvania. And yeah, I learned quite a bit there. And that's actually while I was living in Philadelphia, that's when I started training some MMA and took a couple fights and started gravitating towards that.
Awesome, because that is absolutely the next thing I wanted to ask you about is then you get into MMA, you have an undefeated MMA record. but you also start getting more into grappling and into jiu-jitsu and into this. Can you kind of tell me about when you transitioned and when you made the decision to kind of get into grappling and coaching grappling takedowns on this kind of thing?
Well, when I was fighting, I really didn't train jiu-jitsu much. I kind of approached my fighting career entirely wrong. Like I was just kind of just sparred and did wrestling and, you know, went to like boxing gyms, and I was like, well, no one's going to be able to submit me if I can take them down. And I just thought I was like better at wrestling. Back then, you almost could have still been just a good wrestler and done pretty well. Now I don't think that exists at all. You have to be
This is like
well-rounded.
2010, 2012 time?
It's like 2009, 10, yeah, like back then. Okay. But even then, it was the tail end of that.
Mm-hmm.
But so I didn't probably do the right things. Like how I would coach someone now is like not what I did. But then I had my fights. I had like 3 fights, and then I had a bunch of fights fall through, and I wasn't making money, and I kind of like got, you know, disenchanted with the whole thing because I was broke. I was almost 30 years old, not making money. So I got out of that and started, you know, pursuing other things. And then I really didn't get super immersed into jiu-jitsu until I started going to Renzo Gracie Academy, and basically with my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. And that's when I started taking John Danaher's classes and became close with Gordon Ryan. And then I really got like submerged in it, and I was like, oh wow, this is awesome. I like this more than wrestling. This is the best thing ever. And because I was around like a real coach, not like a guy who, you know, just opens a little jiu-jitsu school in your town. Like it's totally different there than any other academy that I've been at. And it feels like how it felt like at the Olympic Training Center. That's how it feels at Renzo's. And I just, you know, I wish I was like 10 years younger when I found it.
So when you talk about Professor Danaher, you know, obviously BJJ Fanatics were a guy, we obviously love the guy. Can you kind of try, in your words, as somebody who has studied under him, kind of try to explain him to somebody who may not be familiar?
Well, I mean, he's what you think of as an expert. Like he's an expert. There's nothing he doesn't know about the sport. There's not one position that he's like, you know, not comfortable with. There's not one strategy that, you know, he's not sure of. He's just a complete expert. And like, you know, and you see that because you see like the highest level black belts in the world go to him for questions, and they seem clueless when they're talking with him. He's just the tip of the spear expert in his field. And it's super unique and inspiring to be around. And I think that one of the reasons that I'm a good coach now is because I've been now around the very highest level of jiu-jitsu coaching, and I've been around the very highest level of wrestling coaching. I don't think there's a lot of people that have been like trained by, you know, Terry Brands or Tim Flynn, and then also John Danaher, like to really study under both those fields. And I think I have a unique approach in grappling because of that.
That's funny because, yeah, not only the highest levels of both, which I would consider like, you know, Terry Brands and John Danaher the best in their field, but they're so different in personality types, aren't they? You know,
very different.
Yeah. Very
different, but very similar. Like with both of them, the goal is to be a world champion. Like the goal isn't to, you know, get your black belt, or the goal isn't to, you know, make the national team. The goal is to be a world champion, and anything else is just, you know, a failure. And that's how both of them approach it. And having such high standards is why they have so much success and why they're so respected. And they're very similar in that. It's not, you know, and it's different. Like if you're a hobbyist, you know, John works with those people too, that are just trying to, you know, just learn moves and get a black belt or get a blue belt. But, you know, really who he trains are the, you know, his core guys, and the rest of the people in the room are basically workout partners. And that is how it is with Terry Brands too.
That makes sense. When it comes to the room and when it comes to learning from John, I know that jiu-jitsu instructors they always get excited when somebody has a wrestling background because they'll have a couple of skills that are difficult to build. Do you remember John's reaction when he learned of your wrestling pedigree?
I think he probably first saw a little bit when one of the first times I was in there, and I did a long go. We were supposed to be like a 6-minute goes, but it was probably like a 20-minute go, and I was going with Gordon, and I had kept taking him down, but he was like guillotining me every single time and choking me every single time. And then I remember at the end of class, John pulled me aside and like asked, I asked like about my wrestling background and that. And then since then, well, until recently with COVID and everything, but I was pretty, got pretty intertwined with the better guys in the room. And, I was always happy to help during like ADCC camp and stuff, wrestling some of the better younger guys that are still competitive. And I think that John appreciates me being there, and I learned wrestling from him. He's an expert at wrestling too, just like he is jiu-jitsu.
No kidding. You're learning wrestling techniques from John Danaher?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that I really haven't totally seen, but every day he starts with setups and techniques, and it's nice refreshers and stuff. But yeah, I've definitely picked things up from John. He could coach a wrestling. He could coach a wrestler to win at a high level.
Awesome. I absolutely don't doubt it. When it comes to working out with Gordon, Gordon Ryan, best jiu-jitsu fighter on earth right now, best no-gi fighter on earth maybe ever. He is very much out there, right? Gordon puts himself out there quite a bit. Do you have anything about Gordon Ryan that might surprise people, or that people might not realize just from this like image that he puts out there so often?
I mean, it's hard to say because he is what he puts out there on social media, but he's quite a bit younger than me, but he's probably like the best friend you could ever ask for. He's like a genuine, good, generous, super generous, good person. He's he's incredibly supportive of my wife. We're very close with Gordon and Natalia, and he's just a great guy. He's just a great guy. We bounce ideas off each other as far as like business and investing, and I think he respects my opinion quite a bit, and I respect his. And we kind of have like an odd friendship because he's quite a bit younger, and we're different personalities, but he's as good a friend as I have. It's a friendship I really value.
What's it like training with the guy? When you go in and you roll with Gordon Ryan, what does that experience feel like? I
mean, generally when we go, it's more wrestling based, and he's trying to improve his wrestling, and he's staying on his feet, and we're hand fighting and battling wrestling, because I really don't have much to offer him on the ground. Like, he's gonna just do it as he wants. Does the same to me as he would anyone else on the ground.
I was gonna say, you're not alone in that.
Yeah, I mean, but there's no one, I guess I could do as good as anyone else can do against him in the room. But more like, when we train, it's more, he's trying to make himself get better at wrestling, and, and I'm just trying to, push him the best I can. But like, we haven't been in there in a while, but, yeah, he's really willing to put himself in uncomfortable positions, wrestling like, higher level wrestler guys.
That's always really remarkable to me. Somebody else that I see from that current crop that's really competitive and will go for takedowns really often is Gary Tonin. Can you tell me a little bit about rolling with Gary and what, kind of about him?
Yeah, I mean, I don't roll with Gary quite as much, but he's incredible. I think he's like a perfect example of when they say like in wrestling, you could never have a 140-pounder go with the heavyweight, right? He would just, no matter how good he is, the heavyweight's going to smash him. But in jiu-jitsu, they always said, like, even back when like Royce Gracie was winning UFCs, that size doesn't really matter. And, he was choking out all these giant guys. And Gary really is a good example of that. He could go and beat anyone in the room, and he's like a small guy, and he could wrestle with anyone, and he could go with anyone in the room and beat anyone regardless of their size. He's a really good example of jiu-jitsu, like the size and strength doesn't matter.
For wrestlers who are listening to this, it sounds like you're recommending jiu-jitsu highly to everybody, to all the former wrestlers. Go out and give it a shot.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
It's definitely a great thing for people to get into after. Something I want to start to talk about, Kyle, if I could change gears, is the series that you have on Fanatic Wrestling. And that is all about the seatbelt position and then some mat turns, or mat returns, rather. First off, can you kind of talk people through what the seatbelt position is, because they might not know it, and why it's so valuable?
Yeah, that was something that I struggled with, because in jiu-jitsu, the seatbelt is like when you're in a back take position and you have one arm over the shoulder, one arm under the shoulder, and your hands locked. But in wrestling, they call it seatbelt. It would be like a single arm, tight waist from around the back. Like a lot of times you'll shoot a single leg, you'll get pulled off the legs because your opponent will be defending with a whizzer, and you can transition to a seatbelt, reach your hand around the back, try to secure the far hip. And if you watch grappling at any level, if you watch NCAA grappling, you watch freestyle wrestling, you watch jiu-jitsu, no-gi jiu-jitsu, and count how often that position comes up, it happens in every match, virtually every match that's even remotely competitive. You just end up in that position a lot. So I wanted to, when they asked me to do a technique video, I wanted to do a technique that was across all forms of grappling. Like I said, freestyle wrestling, NCAA wrestling, no-gi jiu-jitsu, jiu-jitsu. I want to do a position that would be applicable to every form of grappling. And I think that the seatbelt position is just that. And there's, a lot of ways to transition to, different takedowns depending on how your opponent reacts. And it just seems like it's a position that you have to be good at.
So it seems like you get to the position and then you start to, it's very reaction based off of there. It's kind of systematic in that way.
Exactly. If they do this, then you do this. It's almost like a flow chart. That's how I have, if you watch my DVD, it's set up like a flow chart, basically. This is your first option. This is your second option, third option. I think I have like 7 or 8 different options off that position. And yeah, people seem to like it. It's a position that I do often, when I grapple myself, but people seem to like it.
People seem to like it, and it's selling like crazy. So I'm happy to have you on here to kind of explain it to people who maybe haven't had a chance. And then you also included in this, you didn't just focus on that one position, you also included mat returns. First question, why combine these together? Was there a reason for that, or, what was that?
No, not really. It's not like they are very related, but I just wanted to do positions that are important in all types of grappling. Like, if I could put out like a low single DVD, but I don't feel like low singles are very applicable to jiu-jitsu or any grappling that doesn't have, you're not wearing shoes. It's hard to shoot a low single, or any grappling that you could get like choked. You could get choked when you're stuck underneath someone on your knees, which is an amazing takedown if you're just trying to sell to wrestlers. But I wanted to sell to wrestlers and grappling in general. So I want to do positions that are important in both. And the mat return position, like the seatbelt, is a must-win position regardless of what you're doing. Even in MMA, you'll see that a lot. Someone will get to your feet and you have to find a way to bring them back down to the mat. You have to be able to control them. In collegiate wrestling, it's incredibly important. They get up to your feet, you have to ride them to win. At ADCCs, if you take someone down, they pop right back up to their feet. They don't want to give up that takedown. You got to bring them back to the mat. Any form of grappling where takedowns are important, mat return is a must-win position.
I absolutely agree. And for everybody out there that's just watching, a mat return, you're standing behind a guy, the hands are locked. Is it just get real big, get real strong, lift them up, throw them down like a sack of hammers, or is there more technique working?
Well, that's the first option. If you can do that, that's super effective. But I think I showed about 7 different ways to do it if you can't just, throw someone down. There's a lot of different techniques to it. And I show quite a bit of different ways to get someone back down to the mat to control.
You did, and there's a lot of creative stuff on there that I think people can really benefit from, and I think that's a really smart way to combine it with wrestling and with jiu-jitsu. How do you see those two? I think those two, correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like those two sports are growing closer and closer faster than ever. Is that what you're seeing as well?
They absolutely are. And I see that some of like the wrestling purists are still fighting it a little bit. Like when Flow Wrestling will post pictures of like Gordon Ryan or some other grappling highlight, people are like, oh, this is Flow Wrestling, not Flow Grappling. But obviously Flow Grappling and Flow Wrestling is under the same umbrella. But I think that they're gradually trying to almost create some unique sport. I think I see that happening somewhere along the way, where like submissions count, like a hybrid of both sports. I see that happening in the future because I think that people like that jiu-jitsu is a little bit more like just flying all over the place. Just because you're on your back doesn't mean that it's over. You can still win the match. You could still put the other guy, your opponent, in danger. It's a little more all-encompassing. But I think people also like the takedowns and the physicality that wrestling brings. So if you merge them together, I think it's it's a more spectator-friendly sport.
I totally agree. Kyle, you've been really, really generous with your time. I know that you're in the middle of a power outage, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. Is there anything else before we go that you want to say, anybody you want to thank, or how people can reach you on social media, perhaps?
Yeah, you can. I'm usually pretty active on social media. On my Instagram is @KyCerm, KYCERM. I usually post some decent wrestling videos on my stories with a lot of the kids I train at Long Island MMA. So that's a good place to find me. And hopefully you keep supporting BJJ Fanatics, Wrestling Fanatics, and buy my videos.
Awesome. I 100% agree on that. And for anybody that is looking for Kyle's series, you guys can actually scroll into the show notes on whatever you're listening to, and there will be a link where you guys can follow directly to Kyle's series, Single Leg Seatbelt Series and Mat Returns by Kyle Cerminara. Kyle, thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving us your time.
Of course, anytime.